Welcome to the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews, where movies are celebrated, not incinerated.
Why don't you just go home?
I've been asking myself that one all night long.
So what happened? Why can't you?
I met this girl tonight, okay, in a coffee shop. So when I got home, I gave her a call. She said to come on over. On the cab on the way down here, all my money flew out the window. Then I got to know this girl, and I didn't really get along with her that well, so I left. So I haven't got enough money to get home, so I marched right in there to apologize, but she'd already killed herself. I was too late. There was this girl who was there who witnessed the whole thing who let me use her phone. So now she's the one in the Mr. Softy ice cream truck who's trying to kill me. They're all trying to kill me. I mean, I just wanted to leave, you know, my apartment, maybe meet a nice girl, and now I've got to die for it?
Have you ever just had one of those nights? Paul Hackett has, and tonight is the night from hell in the classic 1985 comedy thriller After Hours, directed by Martin Scorsese. Now, whenever the name Martin Scorsese is mentioned, typically the same handful of movies he's directed always come to mind. Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Casino, The Departed, and so on. Great as they may be, there are other ones he's done that just don't get enough recognition. Since the 1960s, he's directed nearly 50 titles covering all kinds of subject matter. But one thing many of them have in common is Scorsese utilizing the city of New York as his main backdrop. Scorsese was born in Queens, New York, and is never shy to make the sprawling metropolis a prominent player in many of his films. But one of his overlooked films that seems to best show off the darkest and most bizarre corners of the gritty New York streets is his cult favorite, After Hours. The story of a loner trapped in the nightmarish labyrinth of Lower Manhattan during the course of an entire night. Sadly, this film tends to get overshadowed by many of the other movies in Martin Scorsese's extensive career. And it's a shame too, because even though many of his films are considered to be amongst some of the most important films in modern cinema history, After Hours is a more humorous departure for Scorsese that doesn't try to be as heavy-handed as something like Taxi Driver or Goodfellas. And when you watch a skilled director like Scorsese go against the grain and experiment with a surrealistic, dark comedy, the results can be pretty entertaining.
I don't want any entertainment! I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry.
I'm your host, David Rose, and in this episode, we'll be taking an inside look into the making of After Hours, which stars Griffin Dunne, whom you might recognize from my American Werewolf in London review featured in episode 6. You have watched the episode, right? Well, he now takes the lead and turns in one hell of a performance playing Paul Hackett, a mild-mannered word processor who's a bit of a social outcast. One night, he comes across some bad luck and is thrust into the worst and most bizarre night of his life.
Oh, wow!
We'll look at how Martin Scorsese got involved with this project, which, in turn, revitalized his career as a director. Then we'll pop in the DVD and take a look at what bonus features were included. Then, like always, I like to end each episode by recommending the movie to each one of you, using this rating scale to rate how strongly I recommend it, ranging from 1 disc, being just downloaded, all the way up to 5 discs, being a must-own movie. So, without further ado, let's plunge into After Hours. Directed by Martin Scorsese, and starring Griffin Dunne, Rosanna Arquette, Verna Bloom, Linda Fiorentino, Terry Garr, John Hurd, Catherine O'Hara, and featuring Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong. The film was released theatrically from Warner Brothers Pictures and Geffen Pictures on September 13, 1985, and was released on DVD on August 17, 2004. It's 1980, and a 38-year-old Martin Scorsese is a full-blown cocaine addict who suffers from severe depression. And we're off. He's already established himself as an auteur director of acclaimed gritty New York-based dramas, including 1967's Who's That Knocking at My Door starring Harvey Keitel, 1973's Mean Streets starring Keitel and Robert De Niro, and 1976's Taxi Driver starring Robert De Niro and a young Jodie Foster. This film in particular was both critically acclaimed and highly controversial due to its political subtext and intense scenes of violence. The success of Taxi Driver led Martin Scorsese to attempt his first big-budget film in 1977 with New York, New York, starring Robert De Niro and Liza Minnelli.
She's a brownish area with points.
Still using New York as its backdrop, it was a pet project of his that was meant to pay tribute to the big-budget musicals from early Hollywood cinema. Having an extremely stylistic feel, the film was a drastic departure from the gritty urban dramas Scorsese had become known for, which disappointed critics and audiences, causing it to bomb at the box office. This caused Scorsese to enter his deep, angry depression and eventually become addicted to cocaine. After much convincing by his good friend and longtime collaborator, Robert De Niro, Scorsese picked up the memoir of self-destructive middleweight champion boxer Jake the Raging Bull LaMotta. This soon led to Scorsese to direct Raging Bull, starring Robert De Niro as LaMotta. This pulled Scorsese out of the haze of his cocaine addiction and depression, which came close to killing him. However, Scorsese manically directed this film as if he thought it would be the last film he would ever make. He would take this film to his death if he had to. Raging Bull was released in 1980 and soon became one of Scorsese's greatest achievements. The film was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Scorsese. He lost the award to Robert Redford for his film Ordinary People, which also won Best Picture that year. With his newly rekindled energy for directing, Scorsese wanted his next film to be a project he'd been sitting on since the late 70s, an adaptation of the controversial 1953 novel The Last Temptation of Christ. He wanted Robert De Niro to play the role of Jesus Christ, but De Niro was not interested and felt that maybe they should try a different kind of film this time that wasn't so dramatic. Filmed in 1981 but not released until 1983, Scorsese directed The King of Comedy, a dark comedy starring Robert De Niro as a delusional up-and-coming stand-up comedian who obsesses over and stalks his hero, a late-night talk show host played by Jerry Lewis.
Oh, Jerry, I love this guy. Always coming up with these great lines. I love him. I love him.
Although Lewis played the role dramatically, which was obviously against type for him, the film was a comedy that involved dark elements including psychotic delusions of grandeur, celebrity obsession, stalking, and kidnapping. The film was critically acclaimed, but, again, was a Scorsese film that failed to make back its budget at the box office. Now this failure didn't hit Scorsese so hard this time, for he had already begun pre-production on Last Temptation of Christ at Paramount Pictures in 1983. The film was to star Aidan Quinn as Jesus Christ and musician Sting as Pontius Pilate. But by December of 1983, Paramount had pulled the plug on the project after relentless pressure from protesting religious groups. Scorsese was unhappy as he was beginning to feel a drastic shift in the movie-making industry. Personal film projects of the 70s were out, and commercial audience-pleasing films of the 80s were in. Meanwhile, Amy Robinson, featured in Scorsese's earlier film Mean Streets, and Griffin Dunne are 2 out-of-work actors who start to become more interested in producing films. Amy Robinson received and read a screenplay while attending the Sundance Film Festival titled Lies, written by screenwriter Joseph Minion. The title would later be changed to After Hours. Robinson read the script and was instantly blown away. She went to Griffin Dunne and felt he would be perfect for the lead role. He read the script, fell in love with it, and they both agreed to produce the film with him in the lead. All they were missing was a director for the project. Since both Dunne and Robinson had previous ties with Martin Scorsese, they were both pretty certain he was the guy they wanted to direct After Hours. Unfortunately, Scorsese was busy at the time working on pre-production for the soon-to-be ill-fated Last Temptation of Christ, so he had to turn down After Hours despite loving the script as well. While Amy Robinson and Griffin Dunne continued their search for another director, Robinson, by chance, happened upon a short stop-motion animated film titled Vincent, which was written and directed by young Walt Disney Studios animator Tim Burton. Robinson and Dunne really liked the style of the short and began to discuss maybe bringing the animator on as the director of After Hours.
So we sent it to Tim Burton, and he said, "Wow, this is incredible. This is incredible." But somewhere about maybe a month and a half, 2 months after the time we met him, we get a phone call saying that Marty's picture, Last Temptation of Christ, had fallen apart. So we're talking to Tim, and we said, you know, Tim, the funniest thing happened today. We get this call from Martin Scorsese's attorney, who's also our attorney. We sent him this script like months and months ago. He goes, yeah, I mentioned that. He goes, well, his picture fell apart, and it was the first thing he read that he really wants to do, and he wants to do this movie. Isn't that weird? He said, wait a minute, did you say Martin Scorsese wants to do this movie? I went, yeah. He goes, and you sent it to him first? And we went, well, yeah. And he went, I gracefully withdraw from the project. I do not want to stand in the way of anything Martin Scorsese wants to do.
Later in 1985, the same year After Hours was released, Tim Burton finally had the opportunity to direct his first major motion picture, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Now looking back, it's kind of crazy to think that After Hours came this close to being Tim Burton's directorial debut instead of Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Radical!
So, Martin Scorsese was finally on board to helm After Hours. There had already been some preparation done for the movie, but Scorsese was enthusiastic to jump right in. After the arduous and time-consuming film shoot for The King of Comedy, Scorsese was loving this fast-paced, energetic vibe he was getting from this new project. Once production officially started with a low $4.5 million budget, Scorsese made it a point to keep the filming concise and worked with a very small crew to help keep the production moving at a very fast pace. Back then, movie productions weren't usually able to move as fast as he was wanting to do for this film. Now, in the age of digital video, it's a lot more common these days for film shoots to be small and quick, but Scorsese really paved the way by filming this movie in such a frantic manner. And the pace of production really dictated the tone of the movie. The finished movie has this authentically fast energy to it that seems to come from the way Scorsese chose to direct it. He only filmed during the night hours, cutting down the daily shooting schedule into a fraction of what a typical day of shooting lasts on a film set. But with that, the entire film shoot still only took about 8 weeks. And speaking of frantic, let's begin with the film's opening shot. This is Paul Hackett, who's in the middle of showing a new employee around the office, played by none other than Balky Bartokomous himself, Bronson Pinchot, in a small cameo. Paul is a lonely guy with no one to go home to. But while reading at a coffee shop later that evening, he's approached by an unusual but attractive woman named Marcy.
You want another coffee?
No, I'm gonna head over to my friend's house.
Which way you headed?
Downtown Soho.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she's a sculptress. Lately she's been making these plaster of Paris bagels and cream cheese.
Really?
Yeah, she's trying to sell them as paperweights. Wanna buy one?
Yeah, I would. How much are they?
I don't know. Well, if you think you might be interested, her number's 243-3460.
243-3460. Okay.
Her name is Kiki Bridges.
Kiki Bridges. Okay.
Soon after arriving back home, Paul calls Kiki and inquires her about her bagel-shaped paperweights. He then talks to Marcy on the phone, who is sounding more melancholy than before.
I'm glad you called.
So, do you work near that coffee shop, or live in the neighborhood, or?
No, I was just over at a good friend of mine's. Actually, we had a terrible argument. Maybe you should come over, Paul.
What?
Maybe you should come on over.
Sure. Sure. Now?
Yeah? Why not?
Paul takes a cab across town to her apartment. When he arrives, he meets Kiki and Marcy. Once Paul is alone in Marcy's bedroom, he discovers pain medication in her purse for second-degree burns. Marcy returns to the bedroom with a very strange demeanor. She begins telling vague stories about her past, including crazy ex-husbands and ex-boyfriends. Paul notices strange cuts on her inner thigh and later discovers a medical book filled with graphic photos of burn victims. As Paul is becoming more uncomfortable and left in the dark about Marcy's condition, he grows hostile against Marcy and storms out of the apartment.
Are you all right?
Where are those plaster of Paris paperweights, anyway? I mean, that's what I came down here for in the first place. Well, that's not entirely true. I came to see you. But where are the paperweights? That's what I want to see now.
Right now?
Yes, right now. Because as we sit here chatting, there are important papers flying rampant around my apartment because I don't have anything to hold them down with.
Fine.
But left without enough money to catch the subway or a cab back home, he's stuck in the neighborhood. After a run-in with a couple of burglars, played by Cheech and Chong, he notices them stealing Kiki's plaster of Paris sculpture. He goes back up to her apartment to return it and apologize to Marcy, but when he goes back into her room, he discovers her dead body. Now that might be considered a spoiler, but that's merely the beginning of Paul's nightmarish journey through the mean streets of the city. The story continues with even more unfortunate twists and turns that only add to the already paranoid, off-kilter atmosphere the movie has set up thus far. Progressively, the film becomes more and more of a surrealistic nightmare as Paul's evening continues to spiral out of control and you're brought right along with him. It's almost like watching an extended Twilight Zone episode. Not scary, not completely realistic, just odd, but in a good way. And just when you think you have a handle on what might happen next, the film throws another curveball in Paul's direction. But you'll just have to watch and see for yourself.
What do you want from me? What have I done? Just a word processor, for Christ's sake!
Once After Hours was released in September of 1985, audiences weren't really sure what to make of it, despite critics giving it glowing reviews. But with such a low budget and the fact that Scorsese's movies still had a powerful draw, the movie ended up turning a profit. Later, once the movie was released on home video, it eventually gained its audience, becoming a cult favorite and is, needless to say, considered to be an underrated Scorsese film. When the film played at the Cannes Film Festival in 1986, Scorsese was honored the award of Best Director for After Hours. Later, following the production and release of After Hours, famed radio personality Joe Frank came forward and stated that the film's screenwriter directly ripped off a radio drama monologue he had given back in 1982. The monologue was titled Lies, just like the original title of the script, and the first 30 minutes or so of the film does closely follow Frank's radio monologue right down to the detail of the bagel-shaped paperweights.
He met her in a deli. She was short, blonde. They were alone, in the back, where the sandwiches were made. She pointed at a tin of biscuits she said were particularly good. When it was almost time for the conversation to end, she looked at him with a slight pout and said, "Do you like bagels and cream cheese?" When he said he did, she asked if he'd be interested in any bagel and cream cheese paperweights. She had a friend staying in her apartment who made plaster of Paris bagel and cream cheese paperweights, and this friend and her paperweights were getting on her nerves. The only way she could get rid of her was to help her sell the paperweights so she could afford to find her own place. He wasn't at all interested in buying paperweights, and he had the impression she wasn't really interested in his buying them either. But he took her name and number and told her he'd give her a call.
Joe Frank was never officially credited for the story idea of After Hours, but in a legal settlement, he was later, as he puts it, compensated handsomely. Even though After Hours wasn't the biggest hit at the time, what it did do was rekindle Scorsese's love of making movies. He had gotten himself involved with a passion project that he could really sink his teeth into, and is forever grateful that producers Amy Robinson and Griffin Dunne chose him to make this movie. Following After Hours, Scorsese went on to direct The Color of Money, starring Paul Newman and Tom Cruise, which is considered to be a sequel to the 1961 film The Hustler. He also directed the extended music video for Michael Jackson's hit song, Bad. With The Color of Money winning Paul Newman the Best Actor Oscar, Scorsese was finally able to get The Last Temptation of Christ off the ground, this time at Universal Studios. The film was released in 1988, starring Willem Dafoe as Jesus Christ and David Bowie as Pontius Pilate. Still, the film was met with controversy for including dream sequences where Jesus did not die on the cross, but raised a family with Mary Magdalene and became an old man. Despite the controversy, Scorsese was once again nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards, but lost to Barry Levinson for Rain Man. Scorsese pressed on, continuing to direct such acclaimed films as Goodfellas, Casino, Gangs of New York, and The Aviator, amongst others. Then, in 2006, he finally won the Best Director Oscar for his film The Departed, an American remake of the 2002 Hong Kong film Infernal Affairs. The Departed also won Best Picture that year. More recently, Scorsese directed his highest-grossing film to date, the dramatic thriller Shutter Island, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. He's also executive producer and directed the pilot episode for HBO's Emmy-winning dramatic series Boardwalk Empire. So, needless to say, Martin Scorsese has had a huge impact on modern cinema, even though it's been a bumpy road along the way. But too few people realize that it was that little mid-80s film After Hours that became a personal touchstone for Scorsese's career.
I'll probably get blamed for that.
Oh, and how could I forget to mention that both Catherine O'Hara and John Hurd play supporting characters in After Hours, although you all probably know them better for their 1990 reunion as Macaulay Culkin's parents, Kate and Peter McAllister, in the hit film Home Alone. Then in the 1992 sequel, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
How exciting.
So, here we have the DVD. And it includes a fair amount of special features, including an excellent documentary that recounts the Last Temptation of Christ fiasco that eventually led to Scorsese directing After Hours. It also has several deleted scenes in the film's theatrical trailer. There is a commentary included, but it's not feature-length, and it's composed of separate sound bites from some of the film's crew members. You can tell they aren't sitting in a room together watching the film like most other commentaries, and the track only covers a handful of scenes throughout the film, but when you listen to the commentary, the DVD will automatically skip to the scenes that the commentary track covers. But overall, you do get a lot of interesting information about the film through these special features. Well, is the After Hours DVD worth owning? Sure, especially if you're a fan of offbeat 80s films. And unlike most mainstream movies that were filmed around this time, After Hours doesn't really try to make it of the 80s. Sure, there are certain fashion trends and other elements you can't really escape, but in terms of the comedic misfortunes our main character faces and the rising sense of paranoia the film gives you as it plays out, the film definitely holds up. It's a modern-day film noir with a sadistic sense of humor. The film alone is worth owning, but the special features that give you the inside look are the icing on the cake. However, I understand the film's tone might not be everyone's cup of tea. So I guess I'll have to rate my final recommendation as a 4 out of 5 discs. But it's a strong 4. After Hours is definitely worth buying if you happen to run across it.
Is that unbelievable or what?
Well, that'll about do it for today's episode of the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews. Make sure to check out HappyDragonPictures.com for more reviews, and make sure to stay tuned for episode 10, coming very soon. So, see you next time, but for now, this one's going back on the DVD shelf.
Keep the check. It's on the house.
Really?
Sure, what the hell. Different rules apply when it gets this late, you know what I mean? It's like, after hours.
Thanks, Peter.
Sure, Marcy. Have a good evening.
Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. You can be here by 4:30, 'cause I've made your reservation. Don't be slow. No, no, no. No, no, no. And I don't know